Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Rereads channel. Today's video, we're going to be hitting Dany 3, A Clash of Kings. Now, you guys know this is not my favorite plotline of A Clash of Kings. I definitely think it's on the weaker side. And mainly that is because after Daenerys 1, where Daenerys 1 feels kind of like a epilogue of her journey in a Game of Thrones, kind of giving us a refresher. The problem is Daenerys becomes so detached from the main story with Daenerys 2 and 3, where she just feels like she has no real relevance to the rest of the story. So she feels very isolated. And that really continues into this chapter. I do think this chapter is a bit better than Daenerys 2, because at least in this chapter, Daenerys is dealing with some more interesting things for her as a character. I think the one part that keeps Daenerys' storyline from being, unreadable or as bad as some of the plot lines, in my opinion, in the latter two books, is mainly because Daenerys herself is a very interesting character. And that will continue in this story where she's dealing with things like, who she can trust and people's motivations trying to manipulate her and even feeling like her brother Viserys once felt. And she starts to feel a little bit of pity for her brother. And so there's a lot of that interesting stuff. The best parts of Daenerys in this book are, well, the House of the Undying, but also when she's referencing things that happened in the first book because that book was so strong for her as a character. So let's get into page 431. Dany retreats into her palanquin? I don't think I said that right. It's basically this cushion thing for Daenerys to sit in while she's going through the city. She's weary and disappointed after being dismissed by the Carthan Pureborn. Daenerys has been trying to gain support and trying to go back to Westeros. Now that Robert Baratheon is dead, the thing we find out in Daenerys 2, she's trying to do something about it. She's trying to become relevant in the story, I should say, at this point. Jogo clears the way through the crowd, loudly proclaiming her as the mother of dragons. Zaro reclines on satin cushions, pours ruby red wine, and comments on Daenerys' visible sadness, calling her my light of love. Zaro does a lot of manipulation. He's trying to get her to marry him and trying to make her feel, I guess, loved. But Daenerys is going to pick up on that's not really what he's doing at all. Regardless of what you want to say with Daenerys, even though she is so young, because of how she's grown up, she's had to learn how to read people, and something that she's much better at than, say, someone like Viserys. Daenerys accepts the wine and insists her dream is only delayed, though she feels bitterness that the Pureborn never took her seriously. The Pureborn, in a lot of ways, and Daenerys is going to think about this in this chapter, they viewed her as just some spectacle. Dragons have not been seen in the world in a long time at this point. The Targaryens themselves are also quite rare. The people of Qarth, and especially the Pureborn, are going to treat her like she's just some act in a circus. And that's what Daenerys is really feeling. She removes and discards the silver collar Zaro gave her, and it was said to be enchanted to guard against poison, though the Pureborn never even offered her a drink. It really shows that Daenerys was never viewed as an equal by the Pureborn. And so this gesture of having some protection against poison, which the Pureborn are known to be like assassins and poison their drinks, never even got that far. That really tells you how kind of disappointed that Daenerys really is. She realized that they saw her as nothing more than a curiosity, not even a queen. Rhaegal hisses and digs his claw into her bare shoulder as she reaches for the wine. She shifts him to the other side to protect her skin. In a lot of ways, I think Rhaegal, like, say, the direwolves for the Starks, is feeling Daenerys' emotion, right, of being upset. And that is kind of going into her dragon. Her dragon also feels very on edge. And this is something we really don't see in Daenerys in the later stages of the story. She doesn't seem to have this connection with the dragons. The dragons seem to be much more wild. So Daenerys, it's interesting to see kind of how their moods, the moods of the dragons, also represent Daenerys as a character and what she's feeling. Daenerys wears a green Carthene gown with one breast bared, silvered sandals, and a pearl belt, as Zaro advised to appear acceptable to the Pureborn. Daenerys even played this act. She also tried to impress them or tried to fit into their culture, and this will only be the start of that journey, as Daenerys will have much more of this to do when she gets to Meereen. You really feel like Daenerys did all these things that should have been acceptable to gain her at least some sort of audience, and in reality, it was all for nothing. She reflects bitterly that for all their indifference, she might as well have gone naked as she drinks deeply from the offered goblet. Again, it just makes Daenerys feel like she isn't necessarily even a person in their eyes, and that no matter what she would have worn, it wasn't going to help. As we get into page 432, the pureborn of Qarth, descendants of ancient royalty, commanded the civic guard and the powerful Qarthian fleet that Daenerys sought to gain. Daenerys wanted to use them to give her an army and a fleet to go back home. But as we're going to discuss the Jorah later on, I want to point out that even if Daenerys was able to get this fleet or these men, it wasn't going to really matter. And I think there's some really interesting talking points, and why I do think that Daenerys 3 is a bit better than Daenerys 2. And I don't know, Daenerys 1, it's kind of up to debate because there's some good parts about Daenerys 1 and some not so good things about Daenerys 1. The same is true here with Daenerys 3. But there's a lot of foreshadowing to when Daenerys actually does come over to Westeros and how she might be viewed. Daenerys thinks about how she followed all the Qarthian traditions, sacrifices at the Temple of Memory, bribes to the Keeper of the Long List, gifts to the Opener of the Door, and eventually received the summons to the Hall of a Thousand Thrones. The hall had been grand with towering thrones carved and adorned with gold, amber, onyx, lapis, and jade, each uniquely extravagant. The pureborn themselves appeared disinterested and weary, attending only out of boredom and curiosity about Daenerys' dragon, not her. Yeah, it really goes to show that these people are very rich in splendor and all this stuff, but they couldn't really care less about Daenerys. And it's interesting because, again, there's a lot of foreshadowing to her Marine arc, where Daenerys tries her best to fit into their culture while also trying to upheave it, right? Trying to change their values, things like slavery. Here it's very different because Qarth is very much a isolation type of nation almost in a lot of ways. Like, yes, they do trade with others, but they're very much more interested in the things going on within Qarth. And that's very clear. So you have a very interesting idea where Daenerys is already having to gain experience with trying to kind of fit into a culture, right? She's going into, and we've seen this really in every book. Daenerys having to go into the Dothraki culture. We see how she tries to fit in there. Now she's trying to fit into Qarth's culture. It's just not going all that well this time, as much as it did in the first book. Zaro asks her to recount their answer, but Dany says the pureborn refused her. Despite there being polite words, the answer was still no. And even though Daenerys is thinking about this and going, yeah, they kind of buttered it up and they said all these niceties, they still refused me. They still didn't actually give me the light of day. Now, I do want to put this from the other perspective. A lot of times, because we are with Daenerys, we sympathize with her more. But I do want to put this from the other side. If you are the pureborn, Daenerys has 3 baby dragons with very little support. And right now in Westeros, they really don't even know about Daenerys at this point, or even that her dragons have hatched. What's the point of supporting Daenerys? It's a venture which likely will not go well, and you gotta also think the Westerosi people do not believe in having a queen over them. They very much believe that a male should be the ruler. There's really no reason to support Daenerys. Daenerys is not giving them a reason to support her. Unlike as Daenerys goes forward, and something she's gonna have to figure out is that she needs to make her own path, not go begging to all these other people to give her things. She's going to have to gain her own support, make people love her or fear her, whichever way she wants to go with it, and gain that support so that people, when she goes to Westeros, they'll find a reason to actually back her. When the dragons are grown, when she has armies. Zaro asks if she flattered and wept, and Dany says she flattered shamelessly but refuses to weep, saying the blood of the dragon does not weep. It's one thing to try and talk nicely to these people, but it's another to appear weak and to cry in front of them and all of these different things. That's the way Daenerys is internalizing it. Zaro remarks that in Qarth, weeping is considered civilized and might have helped. Now, this is an interesting point because this is very different than what we see today in the real world. So, especially in today's culture, now I think this has changed a little bit, but for instance, men see it being seen as weak and crying and all these things, that's very much seen as bad, that you're not manly and all the stigmas that come with that. And I will say over the last few years, we've definitely promoted more into, men's mental health. That used to not be a thing at all, right? And I do think this is interesting because this is very progressive. This is very progressive to that in Qarth, men should be allowed to cry as much as women should be. They have their own mental issues sometimes, and every once in a while you need to break down, and that's completely fine. But I do think that's an interesting point. As much as Karth is very flawed, there is some progression here that I really like about their culture in terms of how they view, crying. Now, with the Karth people, they cry at everything. So at the same time, I don't think that's great either. But I do like the idea that there's some acceptance of, being able to let loose your emotions every once in a while. Dany says the bribed men responded poorly. Mathis said nothing. Wendello complimented her speech, and Aegon Amuros the Exquisite also refused but wept afterward. So none of these men actually helped her. She did bribe them, tried to play the political game, and in reality, they just took her wealth and left. And I do think, I don't know if that's actually how you pronounce that person's name, but it is interesting that it's like Egon or Aegon is kind of how it's typed, but I don't know. Xaro laments the faithlessness of Carthene men and urges sorrow. It's kind of funny that he's like commenting on the faithlessness of the men of the city, yet he's one of them, and he's doing the exact same thing. Like, he doesn't have Daenerys' best interests. He wants to steal a dragon. Daenerys thinks bitterly that she'd rather weep for the gold wasted on bribes that could have bought ships or hired sellswords. Which, that is one thing, right? If you're Daenerys, you don't have a lot of wealth as it is. Why waste it on things that are not going to get you any further? And that's what I'd be thinking as well if I was Daenerys. Now, we do know Daenerys buying ships, buying sellswords, also is not going to achieve her goal. She asks whether she should send Ser Jorah to demand the return of her gifts. As we get into page 433, Xaro warns this is a very bad idea, that demanding the return of her bribes could bring her death, possibly by the sorrowful men, an ancient guild of assassins who whisper, "I am so sorry," before killing you. That is crazy work. You're going to kill someone, and instead of just like silently killing them and get it done with, they whisper into your ear so you know you're about to die. Crazy work. It kind of is like the opposite of the Faceless Men, where the Faceless Men don't want you to know like you're being killed by them. They want it to be look like an accident and all this stuff, not even know what actually happened. Here it's kind of the opposite. Xaro quotes a Carthian saying, "It's easier to milk the stone cow of Pharos than to get gold back from the pureborn." Dany reflects that Karth seems full of stone cows, unmovable and stubborn. Dany is trying to use a bunch of people that in Karth only care about Karth. They don't care about Westeros. They don't care who sits on the throne, all of that type of stuff. And so Dany is kind of pleading to the wrong type of people. Karth's merchant princes are divided into three rival factions: the ancient guild of Spicers, the Tourmaline Brotherhood, and the 13, to which Xaro belongs. All of them also compete with the Pureborn. They fear the warlocks, though, rarely seen, which loom over all. You see kind of the power structure of Karth and how all these players are trying to get to the top, and it just creates a very politically motivated, but also using assassins and lies and all of this stuff that creates almost an environment kind of like Rome. Like, you think about how Rome falls and all this stuff, it kind of reminds me of that a little bit. Daenerys depends heavily on Xaro, though, whose wealth and connections funded her efforts to petition the Pureborn. One thing I want to note about Xaro that we don't necessarily talk about a ton about is Xaro might not want Daenerys sexually, like he might not want her in that way, but Xaro is basically falling under all the categories of an abusive like partner. Getting rid of all of Daenerys' support, making Daenerys very reliant on him. That is a lot of what I see here. I see that Xaro sees Daenerys as a young woman, or young girl, we should say, and trying to make her completely dependent on Xaro so that she'll eventually marry him. As word spreads of her dragons, people from all over the East came to see if the stories were true. Xaro is now even basically monetizing Daenerys. As weird as that sounds, that's what's happening. Xaro is getting a return, an investment on, treating Daenerys nicely. Well, yeah, he's doing it because he's making a profit from it. Xaro made sure visitors brought her gifts, which steadily increased: lace from Myr, saffron from YT, amber and dragonglass from Ashai, silver jewelry, coins, performances, exotic dyes, a striped Jogos Nahai Hizors, and even a silver-leafed corpse of a sorcerer, which was said to be good luck and all of those type of things. But you're seeing that people, one, want to view the dragons, but think about how Daenerys feels. Daenerys' only value is tied to because people want to see her dragons. They don't care about her at all. They don't want to support her as queen, any of these things. They just want to see the dragons. It makes her feel like she's just at the zoo, more or less. Like she's one of these attractions that people come and see. It's very demeaning in a lot of ways. And it's what gets Daenerys kind of thinking about Viserys. The Tourmaline Brotherhood gifted her a crown shaped like a three-headed dragon with gold coils, silver wings, and heads of jade, ivory, and onyx. It was the only gift that Daenerys actually kept and didn't steal, and for a lot of reasons. It makes you look a little bit more queen-like, and even if you've looked in the art of the community, I think this is some of the better art that you see with Daenerys with this actual crown. Azaro had urged her to sell the crown too, but she refused, insisting she would keep it so men would call her a queen, unlike Viserys, who sold their mother's crown and was mocked as a beggar. And that's the issue. Daenerys realizes she is basically becoming what Viserys was. Now, Viserys didn't have dragons and all that, but still seeing a Targaryen and all this stuff is something that would be, people want to see what is left of the Targaryen dynasty and sizing up who this Viserys Targaryen is. And you understand why Viserys had to do these things. Viserys had to keep him and his sister going after Willem Darry died. And selling a crown, as much as you don't want to do so because it is valuable to your family and to your mother, desperate times, you do things so you can eat. Still, Daenerys realizes that even crowned, she is a beggar, a splendid beggar, but a beggar nonetheless, and she hates it as her brother must have. She's starting to see what Viserys felt like his whole life. Viserys, all he wanted was to be recognized as a king or even just as a person instead of just being mocked to his face all the time and having to swallow it because you need a place to stay or to eat. And Daenerys, in a lot of ways, is finding kind of a new sympathy for her brother. And I'm not saying that she regrets what she did to her brother. None of those things. Viserys did a lot of horrible things, but she's seeing him in kind of a different light. She recalls years spent fleeing city to city, always begging for support, living on flattery and scraps. She's realizing that's exactly what she's doing at this point of the story, as we get into page 434. But then Dany comes to a very interesting point for me, because something I've talked about as we move into the Winds of Winter and we move forward with her story, the real question is going to be, how does Daenerys evolve? And what does she become, especially as she goes into Westeros and she isn't wanted? This is what she thinks about in the chapter. Daenerys reflects on Viserys, believing he must have known how people mocked him, which made him bitter and mad, and she fears the same fate if she lets it happen. It's interesting because she does definitely think about everything that's happening to her, and that's what led Viserys down that road. But Daenerys is going to almost have a different situation, right? Daenerys does all these different things to try and make these people like her, like going into their cultures, like in Marine, and it doesn't work. They still push against her and push her out of their city. A part of her wishes she could return to Vaes Taloro and rebuild it, but she rejects this as defeat. Unlike Viserys, she has dragons, and this is her advantage, and that's the truth. Whereas Viserys really had no chance of ever getting the throne outside of being it with this Dornish alliance that was formed as a contract. Daenerys, if she can survive a couple years, if she can grow her influence and her power, she's going to have 3 fully grown dragons. That's enough to then rival things going on in Westeros. She strokes Rhaegal, who nips her hand while the city of Qarth buzzes and thrums around her. Jogo rides beside her, calling for the Qarthian to make way for the Mother of Dragons. Aggo guards on the other side, and Rakaro watches from behind. Ser Jorah stayed behind to guard her other dragons, having distrusted this venture from the beginning. We know Jorah to be correct, because Jorah understands what Qarth is, and even though Jorah, similar to Xaro, is kind of manipulating, and in a lot of ways he's, I don't want to say abusing her, but he's doing what abusive people do, right? You can't trust anyone else around you, Daenerys, besides me. All of that stuff. You have to become completely self-reliant on me. It's the same game. Xaro and Jorah are playing the same game, albeit for different reasons. But again, with that being said, Jorah is right. As Dany then drinks the wine offered by Xaro, Rhaegal sniffs it and hisses, as if sensing it's not good wine. Xaro jokes that the wine is ordinary and suggests they sail together to seek the finest wine across the Jade Sea. Another thing I want to point out here of why the dragon also might be warning Daenerys is Zaro is this rich person. He's this very, nice on the surface person that's giving Daenerys all this help, but underneath it, he's manipulating her. And that's what we're going to find out by the end of this chapter with Jorah, all that kind of stuff. But Rhaegal, in a lot of ways, is sensing that with this wine. It looks nice on the outside, and in reality, it's not good wine. Dany insists Arbor wine is the finest and invites Zaro to sail with her to the Arbor, but notes they would need warships, not a pleasure barge. Daenerys wants to go back to Westeros, not as an explorer or a beggar. She wants to go back as a queen. Zaro repeats that he is a man of peace and has no warships. Dany thinks privately that Zaro is a man of gold, and gold will buy her the ships and swords she needs. Daenerys thinks that she can just buy everything with gold, and you can do a lot with gold. Ask somebody like Tywin Lannister, for instance, or Mace Tyrell. But it isn't enough in this situation, and Daenerys doesn't really think about that. She doesn't understand, think about it. Why would Zaro spend all of his gold on a gamble of Daenerys possibly becoming queen and then repaying him? The odds are not in Daenerys' favor, and that's what everybody in Quaithe realizes but her. Zaro gives excuses about the uncertainty of his trading ships, claiming he loses ships daily to storms, corsairs, and greedy captains, and implies his fleet is ever shrinking. Now, he's not saying the flip side of this is that a lot of these trading ships are also giving him insane wealth when they do return. Yes, they might not always work. Sometimes you're going to have issues where you lose ships, and that definitely will hurt your business. But at the same time, he's still extremely wealthy, and he's making a lot off of these trades. Think about something like what Corlys Velaryon does. It's the same idea. Trading, and a lot of that is where he gets a lot of his wealth. So we know that this is a very good industry. As we end at page 435, Daenerys tries to counter this, offering Zaro a deal. Give her the ship she needs, and she will make him rich again. Again, it's a big sell, and Zaro isn't going to buy it. Zaro's a businessman. He understands that it's not a good deal. Zaro counters by asking her to marry him, claiming he cannot sleep for thinking of her beauty. And Daenerys is very much amused by this, knowing that he doesn't really want to marry her because of Daenerys's looks or any of those things. He wants to marry her for much different reasons that she hasn't necessarily seen yet. But Daenerys sees through this. His affections are insincere, and she knows he prefers the company of boys. And Daenerys brings this up as well. She's wearing a dress, more or less, that bears her breast open, or at least one of them. And Zaro never looks. But when Jorah, somebody that she knows, is attracted to her, Jorah can't keep his eyes off of her. So, right away, Dany knows Zaro is not in it for her beauty. Zaro dismisses her quest for the Iron Throne, offering instead a life of comfort in Quaithe or travel to exotic places like YT. Dany firmly declares her intent to return to Westeros and take vengeance on the usurper, but Zaro theatrically weeps, begging her to abandon her plans, but Dany insists nothing will deter her. She is set for Westeros. She suggests if each of the 13 lent her 10 ships, she would have 130, but this is where she doesn't think about things, because Zaro points out she will have no sailors to crew them, and the men of Quaithe have no interest in a distant Westerosi throne. Daenerys would have to pay them outrageous rates, and Daenerys thinks maybe she could pay them, but Zaro replies, not very likely. She would need even more money from them, and that's the whole point of this. Quaithe doesn't want to help her, and so she's trying to force it, but you can't force something because you don't have the resources and you don't have the ships. When Daenerys proposes appealing to the Guild of Spicers or to the Tourmaline Brotherhood, Zaro warns they will only give her flattery and lies, calling the Spicers braggarts and the Brotherhood pirates. Now, this is the funny part. Zaro is doing exactly what Jorah does. Zaro is going, all these other people won't help you, only I can. And so you should marry me. That's basically what he's proposing to Daenerys as we get into page 436. Daenerys tells Zaro she must now heed Pyat Pri then and go to the Warlocks. But Zaro sharply warns her against it, saying Warlocks lie and have nothing to offer but dust and shadow. And as much as we will say about Pyat Pri and the Warlocks, they do offer a glimpse into possibly the future and maybe what Daenerys should do. Daenerys replies she wouldn't need warlocks if Zaro had given her what she had asked. But Zaro protests that he's given her his home, his heart, expensive gifts, exotic animals, and luxury, but not ships or soldiers. And it's true, Daenerys has gotten a lot from Xaro. Even if Daenerys is not planning to marry him, any of these things, she is living quite richly right now. And she was given a place to shelter her people for at least a time, even if it isn't everything that she wanted. He reminds her that he gave her 1,000 knights, but they were only tiny jade, amber, and gemstone figurines. Dany dryly notes they are not the kind her enemies would fear, and the oxen helping her right now pull her across Quaithe cannot cross the sea. Their procession stops unexpectedly, blocked by a crowd at a bazaar. So the conversation has very much declined very quickly that Daenerys is running out of options. Nobody in Quaithe is willing to help her, and so she's growing more and more desperate to maybe going to the Warlocks. At this, though, we see Jogo inform her it's a fire mage performing. Curious, Daenerys has Jogo lift her onto his horse to see. She watches a fire mage conjure a flaming ladder rising unsupported in the air. Most onlookers are travelers and foreigners. The local Carthene seem to avoid the mage because they know what this is. This is an act to steal from all of these people. Jogo points out a cut purse in the crowd, but Daenerys has already noticed her, recalling her own street smarts from years spent fleeing assassins with her brother Viserys. This is one thing that Daenerys has that a lot of princesses or princes or lords would not really have any knowledge of these conjurers' tricks. And one thing that's very apparent is, regardless of the tricks being done by this fire mage, all of this is allowed to happen because of Daenerys bringing the dragons back. That's something Quaithe is going to tell her. But it is quite an interesting, trick, because as we get into page 437, the fire mage is directing all of their attention to look up, and then the cut purses are just taking all their gold. So it is really funny the way this is being done. The mage swiftly climbs the flaming ladder, each rung vanishing into smoke as he ascends until both he and the ladder disappear. Jogo praises it as a fine trick. Quaithe says it's no trick. Quaithe explains that half a year ago the fire mage could barely manage simple fire tricks, but now his powers have grown, and Daenerys is the cause. We know this because the dragons have come back into the world. Daenerys is confused, but also amused as well, not understanding how she could be the cause of this. Quaithe then touches Daenerys' wrists and calls her the Mother of Dragons. Jogo brushes her hand away protectively, not exactly in a very arrogant type of way, but he does have to protect his queen. Quaithe warns Dany to leave Quaithe soon, or she will not be allowed to leave at all. Quaithe, another person, giving her advice that they should leave. There's nothing here for her. And when Dany asks where she should go, Quaithe cryptically tells her that to go north, she must go south. To reach west, she must go east. To go forward, she must go back. And to touch the light, she must pass beneath the shadow. Dany realizes Quaithe is speaking of Asshai, and she asks what Asshai offers that Quaithe does not: ships, gold, an army. And Quaithe answers simply, truth, and then vanishes into the crowd. Now, we still do not know exactly what this means. And this is what we don't really get, is the idea of Daenerys going backwards. The way I've always interpreted this is not necessarily as a direction, to go to Westeros, you need to go east. I've always interpreted this as Daenerys needs to remember who she is as a character. She needs to remember that she is the Mother of Dragons, that she needs to remember that she is a Targaryen, and not to kind of continue to be like a Marinese person and all these things. That's not the type of stuff that's going to get her to be Queen of Westeros. Even when we get to book 5 and Quaithe reappears, that's what she's reminding Daenerys, to remember who she is, to help her tame and control her dragons. She's the Mother of Dragons, not the mother of the Marinese. I think the same idea is here, but I also think it's quite interesting because I think that George's overall plan for Daenerys changed throughout the years. And I do find it interesting because how are we ever going to get to Asshai, right? In the Winds of Winter, it doesn't seem like we have time to go to Asshai. It's even further east than she's already at in the story. And so the idea could be, if she goes to Asshai, maybe she goes around the world and she ends out on the western coast of Westeros. But then even then, it doesn't really make a lot of sense either, because it seems much more likely that she needs to go west. She needs to go to places like Pentos and going to Dragonstone. So there's a lot here that we just don't know about Asshai. And maybe this is also to mean that she should go to the Warlocks to gain some sort of truth there. Very confusing. This is one of those things that's still a mystery to this day. As we get into page 438, Ricardo and Aggo warn Daenerys that trusting those from Asshai, the spawn of shadows is dangerous. We know this is where Miri Mazdur came from as well. She studied under some of these people from Ashai. Very interesting that, Quaithe is telling Daenerys to go to this place where Miri Mazdur, her only experience with Ashai really was a bad one. Zaro then agrees, saying the truths from Ashai would not bring her joy. He distracts her with wine and talk of love on their ride back to his place. In her chambers, Daenerys feeds her growing dragons with charred snake meat, realizing they are getting bigger, but no, she does not yet know how to train them. There is no book on how to train your dragons. There's no how do you raise dragons. It's just not a thing at this point. People have speculated, but a lot of that material that would have been there from Valyria is gone. That's no longer a thing. It's something Daenerys will struggle with as the dragons get older and they grow more wild. Ser Jorah then visits and confirms that no help will come from Quaithe. He warns that the pureborn are self-interested and that Zaro's true desire is her dragons. Daenerys jokes that Zaro wants her, but Jorah clarifies the dragons he truly dreams of. And we know this to be the case. Zaro does not want Daenerys at all. Daenerys realizes this herself, but he wants a dragon. He wants something that would give him power, especially to take over Qarth. Dany counters that in Qarth, spouses keep their own property after marriage, and Jorah explains a key Qarthian custom that Daenerys had not been made aware of. On the wedding day, each spouse may ask for one thing from the other's possessions, and that request cannot be denied. Dany repeats this, intrigued and cautious. One thing, and it may not be denied. As we get into page 439, Daenerys doesn't seem to pick up what Jorah is putting down. Jorah explains that this is a very limited value offer for Zaro. Yes, maybe one ship would help Daenerys' cause, but Zaro with one dragon could rule all of Qarth. And you really see where this is going, right? Zaro is much more cunning and much more ambitious than Dany may have realized. Daenerys then tells Ser Jorah about Quaithe's warning the fire mage and the fiery lantern she saw at the Mizir. Ser Jorah agrees they should leave Qarth, but also warns against going to Ashai. Ashai is this mysterious place, and Daenerys will not find the things she necessarily maybe needs to go to Westeros. Daenerys needs support, needs things like armies and things of that nature, but at this point, Jorah doesn't see a way for that to happen. Jorah says they should move to the east and go to a new city. Staying in one spot is a bad idea. But Dany argues that she's already far from Westeros and questions whether going farther east is wise. Dany mentions that House Targaryen has allies in the Free Cities, particularly Illyrio Mopatis. Now, this is another discussion that I've brought up in a lot of videos because Daenerys thinks of Illyrio still as a friend. Even though in Book 1, Daenerys very, much questions Illyrio in her own head and thinks that he's playing Viserys and all of this stuff, she still views him as a friend. But Jorah distrusts Illyrio because Jorah distrusts everyone. And in a lot of ways, you could say Illyrio and Jorah have the same motivations. And you can also say that Jorah has also been manipulating Daenerys, right? Illyrio has as well, but it's still interesting to think about. Jorah says that Illyrio would sell her if the price was right, and reminds her that Illyrio essentially sold her to Khal Drogo. Dany defends Illyrio, saying he gave her the dragon eggs, all of those things, and Daenerys just doesn't understand this. Think about what Illyrio did in Book 1. Illyrio sold Daenerys to Khal Drogo, and then basically abandoned her, and also was manipulating Viserys the entire time. What did Illyrio really give to Viserys and Daenerys? He was sheltering them for a little while, and then even when he comes out later and he's been sheltering young Griff, well, not sheltering, but he's been having young Griff be raised up and be ready to be the real king of Westeros, we know that Illyrio should not be somebody that Daenerys is defending. Jorah scoffs that if Illyrio knew they would hatch, he would have kept them, and would have sat on them himself, which we do know to be true. And this is one thing that always bothers me, is I don't think young Griff was an idea in Book 1. And so if young Griff had been an idea, a plot line that George had thought about in Book 1, I very much believe that he would have kept a dragon egg for young Griff, because if you're saying that young Griff is a Targaryen, a dragon egg, albeit dragons are not in the world anymore, is a symbol of their power, a symbol of legitimacy. Think about how the Targaryens always keep dragon eggs. Aegon the Fifth, his dragon egg, we talk about that in the Dunk and Egg series. or even the third novella, how valuable dragon eggs are. Dany insists she understands Illyrio and is no longer a child, but again, this whole discussion about Illyrio has just proven that Daenerys is trusting the wrong people and is maybe giving people too much credit. Yes, she's saying that maybe Illyrio is doubtful, but she's still defending him. Jorah admits sellswords could be useful, but warns she won't reclaim Westeros with mercenaries alone. A foreign army landing in Westeros would unite the realm quite quickly. And this is where we get to the key of it, because Daenerys is talking about going back to Illyrio, maybe him funding her campaign, all of that type of stuff. But Jorah straight up tells her a mercenary army is going to get everybody against you. And this is why I've talked about why Daenerys will not be viewed all that well when she comes to Westeros, because everyone's going to look at her as a foreign invader. Yes, Westeros, they might be in a civil war, but then when you bring in somebody else trying to come over, a foreigner with all these other armies like the Dothraki and the Unsullied, they're foreign. Young Griff is also coming over with mercenaries, but at least if you're Westeros, you're looking at Young Griffin going, it's the Golden Company. These are, for the most part, founded by families of Westeros that are exiled or whatnot. And there lies the key of Daenerys' issue. But as we get into page 440, Daenerys insists that she is the rightful queen of Westeros. Ser Jorah reminds her that to Westerosi lords she is a stranger, bringing a foreign army that speaks no common tongue. They will fear and mistrust her. And not only that, they will also fear her dragons. Dragons are basically nukes. And so if you can get rid of Daenerys right now, while her dragons are small and they're not really that big of a threat yet, or they're going to kill those dragons before they become an actual threat. So as we continue, he advises that she must win over at least some Westerosi lords before sailing, and Daenerys questions how she can do that if she follows his advice to go east. How is Daenerys going to gain support from Westeros when she has no army, no support, and she's on the other side of the world? It makes no sense. And Jorah admits he doesn't know, but warns her that staying in one place will only make it easier for her enemies to find and kill her, especially now that she has dragons. And that's true. The more that she stays in one spot, the easier it's going to become for someone to try and kill her dragons, like Robert was already thinking about doing in book 1. But I will say for now, I don't think this is the case. As of right now, Westeros is having their own issues, their own civil war. They're not worried about Daenerys. When Daenerys should be really worried is during peacetime. Daenerys reflects on her dragon's growing power and her need to protect them. She concludes that the comet led her to Quaithe for a reason, but since she won't find her army there, she must look elsewhere. Determined, Daenerys tells Jorah to go to Pyat Pree the next day, signaling her decision to seek the warlock's help. Daenerys believes there's something she must do in Quaithe, and this must be it, to gain some sort of wisdom about the coming events and what she should do. Now, I'll say this about Daenerys. As much as I think her plotline very much slows down the pacing of A Clash of Kings and just feels completely isolated, I think there is some really good stuff in this chapter, whether it's with Quaithe, whether it's her own internal thought process behind her brother and how she's starting to feel very boxed in, and her growing desperation of how she's going to go back to Westeros and get all these things. I think there's a lot here that's very interesting. Unfortunately, this just doesn't connect to the main story at all. It feels very disconnected. It slows down the plot. It's even more, I feel like, prominent here than saying, like, say, for instance, Bran's chapters or Jon when he's north of the wall. So, yeah, I think that Daenerys, this isn't a bad chapter by any stretch of the imagination, but in terms of as a Clash of Kings chapter, it's definitely one of the weaker ones. So, I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.